Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Over the Cap podcast. It's July 30th, 2023, and this is Jason Fitzgerald. You can find me on Twitter at Jason_OTC, or very, very rarely on Threads at Over the Cap. You can get in touch with me via email most of the time, jason@overthecap.com. I'm joined by Nelly, but Nelly is sleeping right now. I think it's a mid-afternoon nap. Typically, we are recording this on a Saturday or a Friday night, but that's not happening today. The plan yesterday was to do a late night recording. Jacob decided it was going to be fortnight time again, and slowly but surely my voice was pretty much shot by, I don't know, I'd say about 9:30 at night. I realized my voice was pretty much gone. We had taken the kids to Dave & Buster's, and Dave & Buster's can be kind of loud in there, so I think just between being outside a little bit earlier in the day and then having to talk over whatever the music was and everything in there, I think my voice just kind of fell apart from it. So I think it's pretty much back today, but that means no beer of the day today. So we're not doing the Sunday afternoon beer. So not going to have that one, but we did have some Stone IPA yesterday. So that's what we had last night. So next week we'll be back with, I think I have some Southern Tier. So if that's still floating around, we'll do that one next week. And that's what we'll use for the podcast. So anyway, big week. So hopefully I don't have too many questions. I only asked one time for questions yesterday, just kind of threw it out there because I figured this would take long. So hopefully it won't take too long, but we'll see how it goes. I don't remember a week outside of free agency where there were really that many contract extensions. It was just deal after deal after deal after deal as teams and players were kind of getting in, right before the start of, training camp really kicking into gear. This is the real light part of training camp. You kind of come in, you're kind of, they're getting everybody up to speed, a lot of fan interaction during this time. So I think this is an easy time to try to get these deals hammered out. But this was probably the most that I've seen for this time of year. It's definitely not the most overall. It's close to it, but it wasn't the most overall. That was, I think, 5 years ago or so, 6 years ago. I'd run some numbers on that. But it was these were much more notable contracts than then. I mean, these were some big time player deals, and for the most part, I'd actually say a lot of the contracts that went on during this, I'd say they skewed very much in the favor of the teams. I wouldn't say that any of the deals that came down so far, where we at least have all the numbers for them. You'd look at them and say, yeah, that's a huge score for the player. And, we could start with Justin Herbert, who, sets the mark at 52.5, but I want to start with Aaron Rodgers because that is the most intriguing one. And obviously I'm a Jets fan, so that's the most interesting one for me. So here you see Aaron Rodgers at 37.5. You'll notice that ties him now with Derek Carr, who was the other quarterback that the Jets were interested in signing. Puts him a little above Kirk Cousins, who's at $35 million. So, it's an interesting spot where he is. I run some of the numbers. I'm not going to pull up the contract history page right now, but if you kind of look at it, in another way, numbers wise, where he comes in is pretty similar on a percentage of the cap kind of basis as to where Peyton Manning was years ago when he signed with the Denver Broncos. Not the time when he took the pay cut, the time when he originally signed with them after he was cut by the Indianapolis Colts. I don't think that played a role, but those kind of things maybe give some perspective as to numbers that get floated out there. This is a huge pay cut for him, and in my mind, this was just really kind of a big stick it to Green Bay and that organization. Rodgers has probably been unfairly criticized about his entire career. Rodgers' career, he never really pushed that hard on the contract front. I'm not saying it was Tom Brady, but it wasn't that far off. The deal he signed at 22.5, I think was the number 22.5, 23.5, years and years ago, 2013, that really blocked the market for quarterbacks for a long time, was, it was a good deal. at the time, but it's not like it was so over the market, that you would look at it as anything else. I'm just going to pull up his old contracts here. It was $22 million a year is what that was. And then he jumped up here to 33.5. And again, given the type of player that he was considered, especially in 2018, 2013, he was very highly rated, but you could argue about being the best or not. I think at the 2018 one, he was pretty much regarded as the best quarterback in the NFL. Again, you're not looking at a situation where he was banging the Packers over the head with the contract stuff. That all changed here. That all changed in 2022 last year when he signs the contract for about $50.3 million a year. And yeah, again, you could say that, well, yeah, he was the best player in the NFL, and you can justify that salary, which was at the time, I think, about $4 million more than the next closest player, maybe about $5 million more than the next closest player. But if you watch the way that all shook out, where in his prior contract he had a year taken off it, and when you look at kind of the way that he held the feet to the fire with the decision kind of stuff and what he wanted to do, this really just comes across as like, well, I'm just going to flex my muscle and say, let's see what I can do. And, you can see here, he only earned $42 million on that deal. So the salary itself was not that far off from what he's going to earn the next couple of years at 37.5. But, he could have held the Packers to this contract. It seems like he would have. He could have held the Jets to it. But certainly did not do it. So this was just kind of a flex of, I'm annoyed at the Jordan Love thing. I've given you these two deals to kind of improve the team. I don't think you're doing it, and now you're drafting players that don't make sense for me. So I'm just going to flex my muscle, and you're going to pay me whatever, and we're going to deal with it. And now he goes back to the Jets, or he goes to the Jets, and basically agrees to just go right back down in level to be something that's similar to that Peyton Manning end of career, or a little bit Tom Brady end of career Drew Brees. They were a little bit lower than this on a percentage basis, but very similar, I think, in the way that you look at that strategically. And I never would have imagined that this was going to happen. This didn't make any sense to me given what he did with the Packers, and it just becomes very clear that this was a issue with Green Bay, not so much an issue with him in general. How much credit do you give to the Jets for the contract? I don't really know. I mean, Rodgers pretty much runs the show when it comes to this stuff. He's basically the assistant GM of the team. Timing-wise, this was pretty good by the Jets. I think this was really smart by them. They were able to kind of do these deals, and you get Quinn and Williams in ahead of time, and during that time you can kind of say, hey, look, we don't know what the situation is with Aaron. We don't know what his cap number is going to be. We're going to have a lot of money that we have to pay him this year. We're already tight on our cash budget. We can only go so high this year, and we can really only go so high next year because we don't really know what's going on. And that's maybe $1 million or $2 million extra that he could have gotten. And when you look at the Jets team, let me pull up the Jets here, and you look at some of these players. You've got a really good ability to go to somebody like a C.J. Mosley and basically say, look, buddy, the $17 million, I know you've wanted to stick on this number, and we've been trying to get you to take a pay cut. And I'm assuming that they've been trying to get him to take a pay cut. Look, Aaron just did this. He just took away close to $35 million off his deal. What if instead of $34 million over these next 2 years, where you got those two years, what if we guarantee you like $22 million over the course of 2 years, and we split that between the two seasons and kind of cut your numbers in half? Do the same with Corey Davis. I'm not sure if you can really do that with Dwayne Brown. But you're in a position now to where you can do that. And when you go into next season, and you look at a player like a Laken Tomlinson, you look at DJ Reed, you're in these windows where you've got some ability to go in there and now kind of ask players to take pay cuts. It gives you a lot of ammunition. If the Jets play well this year, it gives them a lot of ammunition as well to really even do the whole Tom Brady thing with the Patriots, where every time you have a free agent that comes in, obviously you can't lay out the rings on the table the way Belichick maybe would have, but you're giving that ability to play with a quarterback who's kind of a legendary quarterback, a quarterback who has given up money to play on the team. And that gives you that chance to go after those veterans who are kind of ring chasing. So let me get into the Rodgers contract, and then just some more thoughts, I think, on the Jets in general. But let's just look at the numbers here on Rodgers' deal. And just to give you an idea of really what he gave up. So he's going to earn in cash this year $36.88 million. I really figured out what the reason is behind some of these numbers. Sometimes you can look for a reason in it. The 12 at the end of this obviously could be something. Who knows? They're kind of weird numbers. $36.9 million in cash, $8.9 million as a cap hit. Next year he's at $38.2, $17.2 on the cap. $37.5 in cash if he keeps playing in 2025, $23.5 cap if he plays in 2025, and then $63 million in dead money that would be accounted for in the future. And you look at where the contract was when he came in. This is his old contract, originally $59.5, $49.3, cap of $15.8 and $32.6 with $60 million dead in 2025. And, he took a $22.6 million pay cut this year. And $11.2 million, almost $11.2 million next year. Call it 11.1. Cap goes down by 6.9 this year and goes down by 15.4 next year. Those are big numbers. And obviously, instead of taking or possibly taking this massive hit in 25, you get to defer that to 26. Some people started to make up some. I'm not going to say make it up, but try to spin this as well. Rodgers was only guaranteed this. He was only guaranteed $59.5. This wasn't a real guarantee. This was injury protected. So, the way his contract worked out, the prior contract, this number that's injury protected was going to be fully guaranteed in February. So the question that you have to ask yourself is, okay, what are the odds that Aaron Rodgers was going to get cut after the Jets did all that trade stuff? What are the odds that would happen? And I would imagine that is a pretty low consideration when you consider the salary cap, the PR ramifications, everything of it. He'd have to be really bad to not earn that money, which in total was going to be, 108, 109, 108,815. And, even if he was cut, let's just say, that Aaron Rodgers was cut and, he had a bad season. The Jets had a bad year. How much do you think that he would earn as a free agent if he wanted to keep playing football? Even if off a bad season, let's say he earns $20 million, that's $79.5 over 2. And when you look at what he's guaranteed right now, it's $75 million. So it's one of those things where, you can try to spin. He only had 60 in guarantees, and now he's got 75 full. But just from a reality standpoint, he's taking a $22 million hit this year, and very easily would have made up that money next year. And if he retires, it means he, earned $22.6 million less to play one season with the Jets and then go retire. If he doesn't retire, he was going to earn more than $15 million. So there's no way that you can really spin this to say he did anything but really, take a contract that was pretty lousy based on where he originally was. Now, how this contract shakes down, based on the information that I've got right now on it, this is his structure this year. So it's a 1.8 base, $7 million signing bonus. There's still $50,000 left over from the workout. That's where you get that cap hit. All the numbers in green here are guaranteed at signing. So next year they have a salary of $3.16 million. You've got the signing bonus proration at $7 million. Jets can pick up an option for $35 million. If they don't pick it up, it all jumps into base salary. So this is the way you would do it to get that cap number down to $17 million. Otherwise, that cap number would jump by $28 million from where it is here. 2025, he has a non-guaranteed salary of $2.5 million. You've got the proration from signing bonus 1. You have the proration from option bonus 1. And the Jets again can pick up another option for $35 million. That'll prorate over 5 years. And that can get that cap charge down as low as $23.5 million. 2026 hits. And I believe these are void years in the contract. I know someone told me there's, dummy salaries in there. And he did that with his contract with Green Bay. But I do know it was reported that he has a no trade and a no franchise tag designation. So I don't think he'd really care about a franchise tag in 2030. Unless it's if you would have to cut him, you shouldn't be eligible to do a future year franchise. So I'm assuming that these are voidable. In any event, they're not years that he would ever have to really honor on a contract. Same way that they were in Green Bay. So, you value it this way. So they would have, if he played 3 years, and the Jets would be thrilled. If he was good enough to play 3 years, they're not going to care about this number. But it's $63 million that you would have to deal with in dead money as you kind of rebuild your franchise in the post-Rodgers years, unless he wanted to keep playing, in which case this number would probably get cut in half because, he'd play for another $40 million or something like that. So if you want to look at the dead money that might exist on the contract, you've got to look at the different scenarios here. So you got the dead money scenarios for him. So we have 2 treatments, a regular cut or June 1, and these could be retirements or cuts. Dead money in that year and dead money in the year after that. So if he was to retire next year, you'd have $28 million in dead money. If he retired, but then you decided to run him as a June 1 cut, you'd have a $7 million charge and you'd have a $21 million charge. What the Jets would do in that case, just as procedural, he would probably have to tell them before. Actually, no, they wouldn't. I'm sorry. If he was just going to do a retirement, what they would do is once he makes that decision to retire, they'd go in here, they'd knock his P5 down to the minimum. They would remove the option from the contract. So his cap number during free agency would only be $8 million. You wouldn't be carrying it to the 17-1. And, then you would process that retirement on June 2nd. If the disaster scenario hits and you were to cut him next year, you'd have $66.1 million dead in 2024. Your other option is you would exercise the option before you released him, which means you'd cut him a check for all that guaranteed money. But that would give you the ability to kind of defer that money to where you'd have a $17 million cap charge for 2024, and then you defer $49 million of that into 2025. It'd be hard for me to believe that either of these scenarios would happen for the same reasons that I mentioned above. Retirement can always happen, so these are not terrible numbers if he was to retire. You get into 2025, if he was to cut or retire, you'd have $49 million in dead money that you'd have to deal with. If he retired, or you designated him as a June 1, which you could do, you'd have $14 million dead in 2025, and you'd defer $35 million to 2026. Again, that's not, terrible. When you get into the void in 2026, there's a couple of ways that you can run this. And I have the wrong number that's down here. I don't know why I wrote 35 down. I must have just carried that over or something like that. Let me see what I did here. I actually wrote these down wrong. I have a feeling I just copied and pasted something and didn't actually run those numbers in there. So if you did a regular void, which means it's going to just void out in 2026, it's going to be the sum of all those numbers, which I think is more than I had down there. So let's see, 2026, right? I believe it's the 63. Yeah, it would be 63 million. If you were able to do that as a June 1 void, This is probably what I just copied and pasted. You'd have the 21 here, and you'd have the balance of that deferred to 2027, which would be 42. Again, that would require a modification on a contract. But if he's basically going to retire, that's usually pretty easy to do. So, I think the only situations that you would have that would be a problem would be if by some stretch of the imagination you needed to cut him in 2024, which I just can't see happening. And the only other one would be if his contract does void out in 2026, and if it's not already in that contract, that he would not be willing to basically move the money to let him be released on second day of free agency, and defer, let the Jets split up that cap hit 21 and 42. Those would be the only two scenarios that would really be a problem, and this one is incredibly unlikely, and I can't even really see why that one would happen, because he'd probably be retiring at that point in his career. So, I think, you look at this, he gave up a lot, and numbers-wise, this works out really well for the Jets. And, the Jets are still not in, a great position with the salary cap. Let me just open up cap room here. Oh, if my internet wants to work. There we go. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. You can look here. The Jets are fine this year. It's $16 million or so. You're not really going to do exactly too much. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the big one is this moved them here to $16 million. So they're still in the bottom third, but they're moving closer to the middle. And because they're in a better position in 2023, they're going to get to carry over a little bit more than some of these other teams. So that might move them a little bit higher. I think if I were the Jets, I think what I would do, and let's assume that some of these players won't take a pay cut. I'm saying they will. Let's assume they won't. And I know I complain when certain teams just kind of go wild with the restructures and everything. But given what Rodgers just did, and given the window of opportunity that presents the Jets, I think they should probably follow a model that the Eagles and the Cowboys first used going into if I remember right, I think it was the end of the CBA. I don't think it was the COVID year, but it might have been the COVID year. It might not have been end of CBA. But what they did was they basically took a bunch of their players the week before the season started, and they restructured them. And it wasn't because they needed cap room for this year. It was because what they were trying to do was maximize their carryover. And it was going to put them in the best position with the salary cap the following year. Because what it lets you do is, for example, for a player like a CJ Mosley, it'll let you gain cap room from him this year. And then in 2024, you can restructure him again, and you kind of get to do it twice. Since all you're doing is carrying over the money, or at least that's the intention, is to carry over the money, it really doesn't present a negative scenario, because if things go bad and you have to cut him the next year, the net impact is zero, because you just carried over all the money you saved. So all the money that you added as dead money, potential dead money in 2024, you can offset that with your carryover if you had to cut him. So if I'm the Jets, I would go in and I would do that with every player possible. We could see what that could get them to. Obviously, in the season, you're going to lose a little cap room. So instead of 16, the Jets are probably going to be operating at about 12. But you could go through these guys, and I'm not going to go through adding void years. Obviously you could do that. But you can restructure him. Let me see, what does he have? No, I don't have down if these are regular roster bonuses that they earn. Let's just pretend they're not. Let's just restructure Restructure Davis. No, there's really nothing you can do with that. I'm not going to bother with him. Tomlinson, restructure. There's a couple other guys. I won't run through those, but you've just jumped up to $37 million in cap room. And those are numbers that you can bring in. So your cap room from this year, I didn't look to see what it was when it started, but it should match up about with this. So your cap room when you started was 16, and you've only dropped that to 12, but you've increased your cap room this year to 37. Again, we're going to take off those couple of dollars on there, but that would give the Jets in the ballpark of $30 million to carry over. So that would jump the Jets here from 16 to 46, and that gets you right smack in the middle of the league. And now next year you can go in and you can restructure a bunch of players again for more cap relief, and that can probably get you into this zone where you're going to rank somewhere between like 10 and 12 in the league. And you go out there and you try to get as many free agents as possible to come in. The other thing that I think would be smart by doing something like this, where you do build up to this 37 million, maybe even a little bit more than that, it gives you the ability to go out there and create trades. And one of the things that, if the Jets do play well this year, always a big question, if they were to play well, the Jets are the kind of team that can go in there and, you kind of pick the bones of these teams that do have players that, are effective, but their teams are maybe falling apart a little bit. You look at, a team like the Buccaneers. I doubt they're trading a guy like a Mike Evans, but, you've got all these players on Tampa Bay who are there that maybe you could go in and, you can make a move to get some of those players. The Rams, would they be open at some point to trading a Cooper Kupp? Would they be open to trading an Aaron Donald? The Titans with Derrick Henry and Zadarius Smith. He's on the Titans this year, I think, right? I might be getting him mixed up with somebody else. You've got players there, that you could go after, that you could potentially bring in. You can look at players who are on a fifth-year option that maybe aren't playing that well. Imagine if the Chargers didn't fire. There's some players there you could go after. So, I think that gives you an ability to kind of pick off some of these teams that are more in a rebuilding mode, to take some of those assets. You're not going to be able to do it, or you're going to have a much more difficult time doing it when you've only got $10 million in cap room to work with. And, then at that point in time, you're going to have to ask the other teams to pick up salary on those players. And when you do that, that's going to increase the trade compensation. And if you're talking about pretty good players, those numbers could get pretty high. If I were the Jets, I think I would do that, and I think that would just open me up to the best possibilities of making moves in the season this year, and having that ability next year to, really just take one more shot at it with Rodgers. You keep your fingers crossed, hope he's at some kind of peak level. And really, when you're probably going to have the best years possible out of Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner. And I know it's weird to say, like, well, and then things might start to go down. It's a possibility that those players are going to peak year 2, year 3, and then you might get, just a little bit of a decline and a little bit more. And, as time goes on, they're not as effective anymore. So I think this is your key window of opportunity. So you want to manage your salary cap to make the most out of it. And again, if you don't do any trades and you don't touch that money, and all you did was create an extra $25 million in cap space to carry over, in no way, shape, or form does it impact you negatively. It doesn't impact you negatively. The only way it impacts you negatively is if you've created that cap room to spend $10 million on Dalvin Cook. I mean, that kind of stuff impacts you negatively, right? Because now you're creating cap room and you're using it on something that's not an effective use of cap space. But if you can go out there and you get a good player, and you get a player that's filling a specific void for your team this year, and your team is a very clear, not just a playoff contender, like a Super Bowl contender, you go out and you make those moves. So I think that this really does set the Jets up to do some stuff, but I think they have to take advantage of it. So remains to be seen. You've got a lot of time to do it. I wouldn't do any of it now. If a player gets hurt, I probably don't touch the contracts at that point, because I think that's a whole different ball game when that kind of stuff happens. But if they're healthy going into the season, do it that Tuesday. Do it Tuesday or Wednesday, or wait till Friday before the first game that you have, and you maximize your your cap savings that are there. So obviously the other big contract that comes down is the Justin Herbert deal. It's a massive contract. 262.5, 52.5 a year, 193.7 total, 133.7 full. Signing bonus is light at 16.1, but the big number here is his first year cash number, and it's $100 million. Now that doesn't mean he's getting $100 million this year. He's getting $100 million over 23, 24, 25, in addition to the salary he was already going to earn as a rookie. 32, 33 million, I think is what it was. It's probably 33,738 is what that's going to be. And you can see that just blows away the market. So this number here is a game changer at that position. One of the things that I thought was really neat with this deal is this is the first deal that very clearly was negotiated with one of the things that I harp about all the time, which is new guarantees. And that is taking out the existing salary that exists in that rookie contract or the veteran contract and backing that money out from the guaranteed total the way that we back it out from the contract value. Typically, agents don't do that because it doesn't sound as good, but you can see how clean the numbers are for him. 100 million new full, 160 million injury protected. And you go back to his regular numbers here of these weird numbers, 133,738, 193,738. Very clearly this is how this deal was negotiated. And I thought that was awesome because this is really the way more and more teams need to be discussing this stuff, with the players. And this is really how more agents should do it because in some ways it can probably increase your guarantees. Now, it didn't in this case, but in many cases it could. So, I thought that was a really good job by them. And, the way his contract works is he's got all these guarantees in the future that kick in. And then he also has a salary that kicks in that is not guaranteed yet. And that it will kick in. And that actually brings his new total guarantee up to $185 million, which is identical to Lamar Jackson's. So again, you can see where they came up with that number. That was reported on, I think, $218 million. I didn't put the trigger dates in here. I have the trigger dates. I just didn't put them in yet for, when his salaries vest and, how they work out. He's a phenomenal player, so I don't think there's any worries with that kind of stuff. Now, this contract, because of that big $100 million number, close out the Jets tab here, it brought up just more and more nonsense of discussions on this new money valuation and not new money valuation, and it's not really that, it's something different. It's more like a 275. In this case, it's more like a 295, 295 for 7 versus 295.5. I just never like these arguments for a couple of reasons. Number one, when you sit here and you compare certain players and you go, well, Justin Herbert's not really 52.5. And, you'll compare him to say, he really works out at 42.9, which is less than Josh Allen. And it's like, well, yeah, but Josh Allen's 43 isn't 43. If we're going to do it that way, you have to be consistent and you have to do every player by their effective value. Herbert's, let me see. I think I have those calculations here. I call it an effective value. Some people call it a paper value. So his effective is 42.3. And, you can see Josh Allen is 35.6. So, it's, again, you don't compare apples to apples if you're not doing it for every player. Now, Lamar Jackson was a franchise player, so he was technically a free agent, so you could do that. But, again, you have to find a way to compare an extension and a free agent. They're two very different, contracts, and you can't bring one to add up to the other. It wouldn't make any sense for a team. If you wanted to, let me pull up Lamar Jackson. If you wanted to match Lamar Jackson, so Lamar Jackson gets 262.5. I'm sorry, that's Herbert's. Jackson gets $260 million over 5 years. So he has a contract. Herbert has a contract that he has to honor, right? At this point in time, Justin Herbert has 2 years remaining on his deal. He has 2023 and 2024. And the salaries in those years are, about $4 million and $29 million in the 2 seasons, which he has to honor. If you are just taking a situation where you're going to say, we're just going to throw those deals out. Well, how in the world does, Jackson's contract compare with Herbert's contract then? Because the investment for the Chargers at that point becomes absurd, right? Because what you're looking at here is, I'll just do them in here. When you're looking at him, if you're just saying that we're going to give him a new 5-year deal and it's going to be, what was that number? 260? 260. 5 years at 260. And he was already under contract for $33 million. Basically that means the Chargers just gave him a 3-year extension for $76 million. So why would the Chargers have any desire to do that deal when the alternative would be, well, we'll let him play for 4.3, we'll let him play for 29, and then we'll negotiate an extension. The market probably isn't going to increase by that much. So let's say they did a contract at that point in time for 275 versus 260. You would have him under contract for 3083 divided by 7, and it would work out to an effective value of 44.04. So why would you do that versus this other option, which would be something like, you would have a 227 plus whatever he would earn then to match that 5 years, because this one's going to run 5. So, you would have this other deal. You'd have to come in with another free agent contract. So you have to value these deals in new money. Now, you can you can talk about the way that you want to value that first year cash. We typically break them down as, year 0, which is the money that you're earning over your rookie deal. Basically what's the prepayment on your extension. And then you get into your cash year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. But this number is important because even when you do have a player who's a free agent, he's going to use this number. And that number is a lot better than this one. But you have to understand the way these situations work. It's like the team would have no reason to rip up the contract. And you can say that the players can threaten and not play. It's not really realistic. It's realistic when you're talking about a player who is a third contract guy, right? If you're Aaron Donald, you've already made life-altering money on the front end of your first extension. If you're Aaron Rodgers, you've made life-altering money on all the different contracts you've had. You can go in there and you can threaten retirement, you can threaten whatever you want, and maybe there's a little bite to that. So those are those rare cases where a team might rip up a contract just because you don't really have another option. Your other option is probably to let the player go. But for a player like Herbert, his big money, is not going to be unlocked until 2024. What he has. So, if you look at what he earned, and again, this is incredible amount of money. $17.5 million as a rookie, $1.8 million in 2021, $3 million in 2022. Now, he would have earned in 2023 about $4 million more. and he would have earned in 2024, I believe it was 29 million. So instead, he's going to earn 17, and then he's going to earn 56. But he wasn't going to have an ability to just say, well, I don't want to play football anymore. That threat would have, been pretty much a hollow threat, because he wasn't, really there. You take a player like a Jalen Hurts, who had an honor, a deal this year for $4 million. He was a second round pick. Like his money is nowhere near, what Herbert's would have been. What leg was he going to have to stand on to go, yeah, you don't have to honor this fourth year. I don't want you to honor it. I just want to match, the biggest number that exists, without that number in there, as if it didn't exist. The team doesn't have the need to do that. That's a problem with the system, but the team doesn't have any reason to do that. And I don't know why we get on these debates where we try to minimize the value of the contract. You can minimize the value of the guarantee because the guarantee is not being reported 90% of the time in the right way, because you're reporting a total guarantee over the course of that entire contract, but you're only reporting new money on the deal. It's got to be, you should be consistent with it. But beyond that, I don't really understand why we continue to go down that route, and do that. If you want to devalue every player's contract in here, you could do that. And what would have happened is Lamar Jackson right now, if we valued every deal as if we just were going to rip up the contracts, Lamar Jackson wouldn't be at $52 million. Lamar Jackson would be at $40 million a year, $42 million a year. That's the way these things work. Russell Wilson wouldn't be at 49. Russell Wilson would be at 40, 38. So it's like we go down this route and it just doesn't make any sense. Doing the numbers this way is really the only way that you can kind of compare apples to apples for what are not, very similar situations. And you have to look at these deals that this is a concept of buying out free agency. That is effectively what you're doing as a team. You're saying, look, you're going to be a free agent 2 years from now. The risk is on you, right? You have two sets of risks. There's a risk that you're not going to play very well. I don't think that really pertains as much to quarterbacks, but it can. And there's a threat of injury. I would say that is definitely less on the quarterback front, but, if you do suffer a serious injury like a Teddy Bridgewater, I mean, that completely changes things. Doing the extension, the risk transfers completely from the player to the team, because they're going to take on all that risk of injury. They're going to protect a bunch of money for skill, so they're also taking on that risk that, you're not an effective player anymore. So, it's for many players, you don't want to get through year 5 and go into free agency. Free agency is really good when you're effective. Free agency is not as good when you're not. And given that you're under contract for so long as a rookie that the teams have control for such a period of time, within that system, this is really the way I think that you have to do it. Now, in terms of this contract itself, I just pulled up, let me get rid of Josh Allen. That's not really a comparable at this point. Jalen Hurts would be the other guy. So let's just see how the numbers break down here. And, I thought that Herbert or Burrow, probably would have gotten to 53, maybe a little bit higher, because I thought one of them would get to 55. And what worries me a little bit is it's very incremental growth. We have 51 to 52 to 52.5. So I think you're seeing a slowing down as to what teams are going to be willing to pay the quarterbacks. The cash flows, like I mentioned, this is the huge thing, is that $100 million in year 1. Year 2, he's at 124 compared to 112. In year 3, we make the turn and he comes back down to earth, right? He's at 160. Lamar Jackson's at 156. We have a 212 to 208, and then 260, 205 to 260. So this is pretty clear a deal to me where it's these two front-end cash numbers along with, taking that guarantee that gets the deal locked in versus here where the Chargers kind of brought it down to cost certainty levels to where it's just a minor jump over Lamar Jackson. So, you didn't get a lot of movement that way. The guarantees I thought were kind of light overall. Even though the numbers are big with the 193.7 and the reported 218 and the 133.7, when you get into these new guarantees, you had a 185 for Jackson, you had a 175 for Hurts, and then a 160 for Herbert. Your guarantees per year, he's 38.7. He's a little bit lower than Jackson on the full per year. But I thought though that number was a little light as well. So it's upfront cash is really good and really important, I think, for the league. This is really your first significant movement, I think, since the Dak Prescott contract a couple of years ago. That really helps push things, forward for the quarterbacks. But I thought this was overall a little bit light. And how far maybe they could have pushed these numbers. But one of the things that, and I realized this after the fact, I don't remember if I was, might have been talking with Brad about it or something. When I started to look back at players that had 2 years remaining on their contracts, even for, the good quarterbacks, you started to realize that the resetting of the markets were not to the same level. And in some cases, guys didn't even hit it. And I think that's just because of that extra year of risk that's involved. And it's almost like you're getting money 2 years earlier. So, if you are taking into account some kind of time value of money equation for both sides, that can devalue the contracts somewhat as well. From a salary cap perspective, it's similar to the, somewhat similar to the Hurts deal, not to that same level. But first 3 years in this deal, moderate cap number. So his cap number remains unchanged for this year because they should have gotten his roster bonus out of it as part of this. He'll be under $20 million next year. He'll be at 37.4 the following year. You get to 46, you get to 58. They can deal with all this. This is the only one where you just say, okay, well, where is the cap going to be? It's probably going to be pretty high, so that's probably not going to be worrisome. But I do look at that cap number, especially if they have to go in here and restructure in either of these 2 years. You might be able to get this to an albatross level to where they can look at doing another extension. Now, depending on how things shake out, with some of the stuff that I had mentioned before, this would be one of those areas where, maybe you can get that little bit of bump where you can get some years thrown off a deal. But more so than that, these are what you would call the cash light years of the contract. Kind of weird to say that on a contract that averages 52.5. But they're a little lighter in the cash than up front. So if you do an extension over that, that's going to bump his salary, which here is $52 million. That might bump it to $95 million. So I think this is very important for them. The bigger the number, the bigger that the Chargers make this number, the more things probably work in his favor for doing another extension down the line. As for the Chargers cap-wise, they're at 12.2 right now. Next year, they're in rough shape. They're going to have to gut their roster. They're going to have to make some wholesale changes. You look where they are in 2025. They're still kind of towards the bottom of the league, even though it's a lot of room. They're near the bottom. It's not even worth it to go this far out anymore. Really, you're dealing with 2-year windows in the NFL these days. So getting him at a low number, which is $10 million off where he was before, gives them some ability at least to work around some of the numbers with him. It also gets him under contract before maybe something happens where you start to feel like, okay, what am I here for? When in his 5th year, the Chargers really went all in last year and this year, and you almost look at it like this is a pullback season, given their cap situation and everything else, that they might not have that ability, to go in there and really put together another big team. You're probably going to see a lot of cuts and a lot of players moving off the team. So that gets rid of any of that drama that could exist. So, it'll be interesting because this is possibly a deal where it's kind of all in on 2023 2024 might actually be a step back, but in 2025 they have that cap hit low enough to where once they make those other changes, they're probably going to jump, somewhere up in here. Gives them one more shot, I think, to do some stuff with him when his cap numbers are at 37 and then 46. To where you can kind of try to retool that team again, but you might be sacrificing 2024 a bit in the process to do that. But I think this was probably as good of a deal as the Chargers could have done, and so I think that's pretty good for them. And he gets a lot of protection. He gets stuff locked in. The quarterback salaries are so high. It's I'm not sure if people really even care that much sometimes about those. I made a comment about it with Joe Burrow, who unfortunately got a calf strain a little bit after that. But, I made a comment on Twitter, which, God, Bengals fans, very, very angry when you mention anything about finances with them. I just said, this is a very different spot for the Bengals with Joe Burrow than the Chargers with Justin Herbert. And no way, shape, or form am I saying a deal is not going to get done with Joe Burrow. In no way, shape, or form did I say or put Joe Burrow will not be the highest paid player in the NFL. There's a lot of differences that you're going to look at in structure when you're talking about the Bengals versus the Chargers, and that is basically the Bengals won't guarantee any salary in the deals. They'll pay you a ton of money up front. The contracts are better contracts than you see many other teams give. They're going to be a lot more money up front a lot of times, and much larger signing bonus. You get a nice roster bonus in the second, sometimes even the third year. But you don't get that on a piece of paper protection, even though they're going to honor the deal. That's just the way they do stuff. If he signed for 7 years, you could probably guarantee no matter how good or how bad he's going to be, he would be there at least 6 of those 7 years. But in a league where you really try to push sometimes these guaranteed numbers and you don't get into the nuances of some of these other things. And this is one of the things that's probably a negative a little bit for the Bengals. The fact that Herbert got to that $100 million new money number, which is super big. It's such a big number. It's like that takes a little bit out from the Bengals. One of the things they could have offered is, let's say that Herbert came in very similar to Lamar Jackson. Let's say he came in at 82 or 83. If you become the first player that hits, 100 in new money in that first year, that looks really big. Now, for the Bengals, if you're going from 100 to 105, it's like that's not as big of a deal. Now, they might structure it in a way to where it all hits this year, a lot of it. And that's obviously game changer too, but that changes the way some of the reporting goes on it. So it was more a comment of just, a deal is not going to be imminent. And, one of the things, and this is one of those things with Twitter, and I guess all this stuff, if there's one thing that I know, and I know I get stuff wrong from time to time. I got a player wrong on a team, I think, before, and you get things wrong. I think it was Zadarius Smith, right? I mentioned Titans. He's on the Browns, right? Different things time to time. One thing that I know is most of the contract stuff. So don't claim that this is the new Bengals. Don't come at me with, Orlando Brown got his whole deal guaranteed or whatever it was. That was fake news. That wasn't real. He got a ton of money up front this year. He didn't get his contract guaranteed. Usually the step for a team like the Bengals would be to do injury protection. It would be injury guarantees, versus the vesting type guarantees or whatever. But you just wait to see. But I think it's just a more drawn out negotiation just because of that aspect of it. But it's not that the Bengals are going to be cheap, in doing this. And I don't think the Bengals want to do too much in the way of the guarantees either, because, again, while you can always make exceptions for a quarterback, it does become difficult when you're dealing with other negotiations. And obviously they have 2 wide receivers that are going to want to get paid, to say that, well, we were willing to bend the rules for this player, but we're not willing to bend them for you. And, that just becomes a little bit more difficult. So do I think a deal will get done? Yeah, a deal will probably get done. I just meant to say that it was not going to be a situation, I didn't think. I thought the odds were very against it being, okay, Justin Herbert's done today. within 48 hours, Joe Burrow's going to be done. Like, it just, that I don't think would fit the Bengals way that they work. Excuse me. Other deals that came down. Let's see. What are some of the other ones? So you had Andrew Thomas on the Giants. This is a really good deal, I think, for New York. You can paint this as a win-win. Some different ways that you can look at this deal. But ultimately, he comes in second highest paid player at the position, and I'm sure the Giants sell this as, well, on someone that's a long-term deal, you're the highest paid. You're at 23.5. He's only at 25. You have a 117.5 new value. This is only $75 million. You're making more money than Trent Williams, who's on a 6. We're giving you the second highest guarantee at the position with 67. Fully guaranteed, the most ever at $67 million at signing. But you start to get into these numbers. First year cash, he ranks third. And this is a pretty big gap between Bakhtiari, Stanley, and Thomas. 3 year cash, he's still down from Tunsil, so he didn't really match. One of the ways that you can do these kind of deals is you would say, okay, well, we want more years from you. You're going to give us more years, but we'll match the cash for the 3 years. We'll match Tunsil at 75 for you for those 3 years, and then we'll bring your numbers a little bit down on the back end, to get you down to the 23.5. His is more very straight, that it goes to that 72.2. So I thought that was all really good by the Giants. I thought they kept the payments relatively low on the front end of the deal. I thought this was a deal where when you get into the new guarantees on it, that this didn't work out as much in his favor, as some of the other guys. On the full aspect it is, 51.25 with Stanley. Thomas is at 47.8, and then you got a big gap to Williams at 40. But when you get into the injury protection, you're at the 58 for Stanley, and then you're at 48 for Thomas. Williams is up to 45. Armstead is at 43, and you start getting into some of these other deals, and the amount of years that the player is under contract is a lot less, and you can see in his guarantees per year, his numbers are good, but they're not like great. I would say they're just solid. And, you get into when you could release a player in theory, this would be more of a trade because, his salary is already guaranteed in 2026. But you get into those last 3 years and, even if they had to restructure one, probably even 2 times, definitely cuttable. And you look at the cap numbers. I mean, they just did a rock solid job. It's just steady: 23.6, 20.9, 20.4, 22.4, 22.4, 22.9. So you're talking about a player at a position that ages very gracefully. You do get players onto a third contract with this, and you've got him under contract for 5 new years. And he's not going to be eligible for free agency until he's 31. You might be able to hold off on an extension until he's 29 or 30. So, the Giants just have lots of flexibility with this to where you have the best young left tackle in the NFL. And I have a feeling that this 23.5, 2 years from now, is probably going to be closer to what you see more of your above average starters getting versus your high level tackles. And so the Giants will have a good contract on their hands a couple of years from now. The years, you would have liked to have seen him get less years. I don't know what leg there was to stand on with that. You look at the left tackle market, and yeah, there's a lot of these guys at 4 years and 3 years, but these are not top level players. Colton Miller is not a top level left tackle. Garrett Bowles is not a top level left tackle. Good players, but they're not like the elite level players. But one of the things that I look at with this is if you are an elite level player, and by offering 23.5, very clearly, Giants are considering him an elite level player. I just think it should give you an ability to push for more up front in the contract, push for more guaranteed total, just some different things that you can get. And, I know the situations are very different, and I know they're comping him to here with the Ravens, right? And that's a 5-year deal. And this was a player who was also signed like halfway through, if I remember right, halfway through his 4th year. So similar to Thomas in that there was 2 years under contract remaining. But I think when you see Tunsil at 3, and Tunsil did have that deal before that was 3 years. Now, granted, he did only have the 1 year remaining on it. When you see Bakhtiari at 4, Williams is only at 6, so he could get to a certain number. He needed to get to a number that reset the market, and that was the only way San Francisco was going to do it. I would look at those two, and I would just really try to make this about getting a 4-year deal. I think that would have given Thomas a much better position towards the end of it, because all these numbers, in my mind, should have stayed the same even on a 4-year contract. At that 5th year, realistically, this number should be bumped. I mean, this should be at like 77 or 80 or something like that. Especially when you look at Tunsil. I mean, you're talking about 3 years in length. New guarantee, what was his? 31 and 41. So, you're at, 10 million and change per year, and you're only at 9.5. And Tunsil's injury protection is like 13.8 per year. You're at 9.5. Those numbers should be bigger. Those numbers should be like 11. They should be somewhere in that ballpark to kind of keep up with the other players. Now, there are some things non-guaranteed that might be, funny money guarantees, and some other ones. Like he didn't get per-game roster bonuses or workout guarantees. And those are silly guarantees. Those are ways to inflate it. So his earnings are higher. That can close that gap a little bit on the guarantees. Like if they had guaranteed these bonuses the way like the Jets do or San Francisco might, Eagles I think do that as well. That might have increased it a little bit. To put a little bit more in line, but even still, I would take that, again as just I think a solid deal for the team. So that was another one that I think came down. So yeah, I think that was a good job by the Giants. That was a job by the Giants that was pretty solid overall, and I think this is one that they certainly won't regret, like some of the other bad deals that they had done in the past. Let's see who else. We've just got so many different things. You've got contract stuff going on with lots of different players. So we got Diggs. Let's pull up Diggs. Cole Kmet, Trey Hendrickson, Budda Baker. I mean, those were more just kind of solving some contract issues here. Hendrickson and Baker, they're like some small raises here for some extra money down the line. Saquon Barkley, I think that was this week, right? After all that he, takes that deal or whatever. But, so here's Diggs' contract with Dallas. This is another really good one, I thought. So he gets the 19-4. He's a second-round pick. He gets a ton of interceptions. And you can argue the efficiency of a player like Diggs, all right? He's a gambler. Best comparison might be a guy like a Marcus Peters. Not Marcus Peters now, but Marcus Peters, years ago, when he was probably a high-risk, high-reward player. And I think there are probably ways to work out the numbers to where you can actually find a benefit to the high-risk, high-reward kind of thing that, that if you're a shutdown corner, one of the things that I've talked about a lot here is because of the way the passing game works in today's NFL, having a shutdown corner is not enough. And if you're locking down your target, but all that's doing is funneling the targets to somebody else who's catching the football, you're not really doing that much. Overall, it's a minimal impact probably on the game. If you're somebody who gives up some big plays, but they're not that much bigger than maybe some other players on your own team would be giving up, but at the same time, you are, defending some passes, and more so than that, you're getting the ball back in the hands of your offense. That might actually outweigh some of the negatives that come. So I mean, you can see his valuation that we had is pretty low, relative, at 8 million, and that's in part because his PFF grade, which I don't have in front of me, but I'm sure his PFF grade was not that good. And I would say that, I usually calculate a kind of a net yards given up by a corner, based on, interceptions, yards, kind of yards per target-y kind of thing. Some stuff like that. And, he was probably pretty low. He probably gave up a lot more yards than you would expect for someone who was targeted that amount of times. So, I didn't have him as very high, but I know from a realistic standpoint, teams value those interceptions pretty highly. And it's not like, Jackson on the Chargers, who struggled a bit in free agency. There's a big difference when you're a number second round draft pick versus like an undrafted type. You don't have those questions about how you can play in free agency and that kind of stuff. So the breakdown on this deal is pretty solid. You look at the numbers. So he does get the guarantee that kicks in, but I believe that the guarantee kicks in this year, in 2025. Let me see if we have the notes on that. Yeah, injury guarantee doesn't guarantee until 2025. So if you have him here, and let's say the gambling no longer pays off, you can drop him 12.75 on the cap. That's not bad. That is not bad at all. 2026, you can drop him at 8.5. So, I mean, unless they have to go in and restructure, and, realistically, it's 11 million base, 16 cap. Where are they with their cap right now? Dallas, 2024. 9 million. I mean, they might have to. I would say it's unlikely that they would have to do that. I think they could maybe get away with it because they're going to do some stuff with Dak that'll change their salary cap situation a bit. So I just think this is really solid for them. These numbers don't jump on the cap until much later, and the odds of him earning this in 2027 probably pretty slim. He's got 4.25 dead, so I mean, you can go back in there and you can renegotiate to something lower at that point. Let me just see how his numbers work out overall. Oops, we are having a little problem here. Let me pause this real quick. All right, sorry about that. I think it's working now. Something wasn't plugged in right or something there, but I think I have that set up. So Diggs' numbers here, 19 for a year. Let me just pull those up within market just to give you an idea. Corner. He's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sixth in the league at corner, or tied for fifth, I guess, with Lattimore. And Lattimore's guarantees, you can see, are much, much better than Diggs' package. 68.4 to 42.3, 44.3 to 33.3. New guarantees are probably closer because Lattimore probably had more money in the existing rookie deal. Let's just see here. Whoops, let's get rid of left tackle. Lattimore was 33.5. Diggs is 29, 38. Yeah, I mean, there's no comparison. I mean, there's just no comparison there. His cash flows on this deal, big for him. He gets an $18 million raise this year, $30 million through year one, another $10 million salary in year two to get to 40. And you can see Dallas bumps up those numbers in the last 2 years with those salaries of 20.5 and 21 million. And again, when you go back to that cap breakdown, these years are what I would call not likely to be earned. So really, you're probably looking at a 55.5, over 3, so 18.5 is probably the number that Dallas is in at on this deal. So, I think that this really works out for Dallas in terms of value, and you have to separate the two things sometimes. Your opinions on a player and what the market will bear. In my mind, this is very much under, I think, what a market value would be for him. And Dallas probably doesn't get enough credit for some of the contracts they do. Dallas actually does a lot of good contracts. You see that obviously with Zach Martin complaining about his deal, Tyron Smith's deal. What happens is Dallas gets kind of blindsided by some of these deals they do that aren't, great. Ezekiel Elliott, which was just a byproduct of just bad decision making. Jalen Smith, you run into some of those things, but at the same time, they do some pretty good contracts, and this is one of them. I mean, if you just want to look, I'm just going to compare it to Lattimore's cash breakdowns, and the Saints actually do a pretty good job with their deals too, relative to what someone expects. So he makes out better this year than Lattimore did over he might have had 2 years left. But you can see it's a 31-30, so they're close. Year two, it's 45.5 to 40. These are players on the same annual value, 60.5 to 55.5, 78.5 to 76, 97. So again, that catch up really doesn't happen until year 4, year 5. He's not going to be there. The odds are strongly against it. And if he's still there, you're not going to complain about the salaries at that point, because that means that he was playing fantastic. So, I think that this is a very good deal for Dallas. Now, obviously, he needs to probably stabilize a little bit in performance, but just in terms of looking at a contract and what players typically might make who kind of fit that same mold, I think that, that's very good. Sorry, just making sure I was actually still recording a separate audio file. I think that was that's a good one. So I think that this is a really solid deal for Dallas. I like this one as well, of the deals that came down. Cole Kmet, we've got a problem here. I got to check out why this is showing up this way. Usually this means we have an error in our back end. So I gotta look to see what that error is. But something is screwing up on it. I'll see what we have here. But something is not right, and I can also get 21 naughty wedding pictures. That's great. One of these days I got to learn how to control that stuff a little bit better. So anyway, he signs the extension. This comes in under like the Dawson Knox territory a little bit. Let me just pull those up. Tight end. Where's he at here? He's at 12.5, so he matches Hunter Henry, in that regard. But he's a little below Dawson Knox. He's a little below David Njoku, and I think that was kind of important to get done. He does get a nice guarantee package. 22.9 full, moderate signing bonus at 8. Big thing for him, I think, was the first year cash comes in at 20. So that's a lot better than many of these other players. So, it's a lot of money up front. Now, the Bears are in a position where, they probably want to spend some of that money up front. By year 3, obviously, he's more in line with Dawson Knox at that point in time. So, I think this one is probably falls into the category a little bit more of a, a win-win kind of situation. I think he benefits from the Bears' position with having to spend. Let's just pull up Dawson Knox and Njoku. He probably benefited from that a little bit. That probably helped him out. But it's not like anything else. Yeah, that's what we have wrong. So I got to look to see, because obviously it's not pulling the numbers properly, and it blew up his webpage. So I'm not able to check that out right now. I gotta figure out what the fix is on that. So yeah, these numbers are all incorrect here. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but I'll take a look at it and see what data entry was incorrect there. But the numbers wise, it's a that one is a little bit more of a solid deal. I think again for both, but that's one of those deals that might skew a little bit in favor of him as a tight end, and I got to look at vesting dates on here, to see if there's that protection. But certainly by 2026 you can drop out of it, and move on from there. So I'll see. I'll get this one fixed and figure out what those issues are. But this one is I think a pretty solid deal for him overall. But I think it's a good deal for Chicago as well. And Chicago's in a position where you want to start extending some of your own players. You want to kind of set that tenor, because last year you had the issues with Roquan Smith to where you couldn't get a deal done there. So this gives you that ability to maybe get a contract done. I think that was most of the deals that came down. Hunter came to an agreement with Minnesota today. Hendrickson gets 1 year. So Hendrickson, what they did is they gave him a $5 million raise this year. I don't even, I think I have it in the notes here. Let's see. I got a typo. Cap number in 23 is basically unchanged. 2024 increases just by 2.7 million. And now he's under contract this year. He'll have a cap number of 18.6 if they get there. It's only 2.6 dead. So, in many ways, the Bengals probably look at this as, okay, he wanted a raise. He's outperformed his contract. Now, Bengals have never done this before with 2 years remaining on a contract. I pulled all the numbers up. You'd have to go all the way back to pre-2011 CBA, Carson Palmer. When he was on that rookie deal, they did like a 10-year contract or 12-year contract with him. So they've never really done this before. But I have a feeling he probably wanted more money for this season. They were probably not willing to just say, look, we're going to give you $5 million more, or, we're not going to take $5 million from next year and move it up to 2023, because all that means is we're going to have more of a problem next year when you want to redo your contract, right? That's what happened with Minnesota and Hunter. You move money up to kind of try to pacify a situation, but eventually that situation blows up on you and you've still got to get a deal done, which Minnesota had to do with a 1 year, $17 million, I think is what it is, that they end up doing with Hunter. But, so I think what you had happen here was, we're not going to give him a $5 million raise. That sets a really bad precedent. We don't want to take $5 million from 24 and move to 23 because A, that probably sets a bad precedent for us. B, it creates a scenario in 2024 where we're just going to have more issues with him on an extension. So what if we just do the 1 year contract? We call it 21. So now he's going to be, pretty highly paid among edges, right? You're going to move him up now from, he was at 15. So now you're going to look and be like, hey, we're now valuing you as a $21 million player. You're right in line with all these other guys. And it really delays a situation, from getting out of hand. And I think if you go and if we look at his history of earnings with the Bengals, let's see. He earned about 20, earned about 12, he'll earn 18, 15, 16. These numbers probably aren't going to cause a tremendous problem. They probably won't. He was going to earn 13, now he earns 18. 15, certainly 15 is probably going to be okay. 16 might even be okay. So if you're the Bengals, this might just give you that extra year of certainty if he's still playing well, and you can keep him. So I think that was okay for them. Buda Baker was the other one. His is now 2 years, 14-1. They gave him like a $300,000 signing bonus. I don't even have the numbers in front of me for what it was before. I mean, it's a little bit of a raise over where he was. I don't think it's a huge thing. I didn't even put it in the notes here, the changes that existed. I probably should have. But, they guaranteed his salary for the year. Very modest signing bonus. So I would imagine, unless there's a no trade that I don't know about, this is one of those where you're getting a deal done and it's like, well, we still are open to trading the player. And you might get that. And, that's the same thing with Hunter and the Vikings. That's a deal that should have been done before. Like, very early on, if you can't trade him, that trade market doesn't exist. So you need him to show up. You need him to be locked in. You need him to play well, because the trade market for a lot of these players really maximizes in season, not out of season. For these players that are more of a one-year rental or nearing kind of the end of their careers, when you're a team like Arizona that's not expected to be good, you might have a team that's doing well that needs help at safety, and they might be willing to pick up of this $13 million. They might be willing to pick up $8 million of it, or $6 million of it, $7 million of it. So, you're trying to put your best foot forward, keep the player happy, keep him performing well, and at the same time, that gives you the ability to maximize your trade compensation. I mentioned about the Jets before. Any team that needs a pass rusher is going to look at a Hunter if they don't have to get involved with a long-term contract right now. If in week 6 you're 4-2, but you want to improve your pass rush, or you just think you can, maybe even just block him from going to another team while at the same time helping yourself, you'll be willing to pick up $8 million in salary. So it doesn't really cost you that much more if you're the Vikings, to pacify the situation, because your trade potential is still there. And maybe if you were only being offered like a 4 or a 5, in season, that could jump as high as like a 2. If you find the right team, if you find a desperate team for it. So I in my mind, these situations should resolve themselves earlier. I understand why they don't, but they should. It doesn't happen enough. Let's see, were there any other deals that I am kind of forgetting here? I don't think so. I don't think there's anything else. So, the other thing which I wrote about a little bit is Nick Bosa didn't show up to camp. And Nick Bosa can get fined, I think it's $40,000 a day. It's either 40 or 50. I think it's $40,000 a day. And for each preseason game he misses, he gets fined a pretty hefty amount. It's close to $1 million a game, $900,000 a game, give or take a little bit. Now, those fines can be rescinded by the team. It's not the same situation as with a veteran player. But the fact that he didn't show up to camp, that probably tells me a little bit more that he is not close to a deal with San Francisco. And I think that, this Aaron Donald contract that came down, I think has kind of thrown the market into chaos, where he's the guy that got to 31-7. And, I think that really changes, changes the outcomes for a lot of things. So let me just pull this up, because I think I have some numbers here. So this was just a look at how the defensive player market has evolved over years. So Mario Williams, now this is looking at long-term deals, so I'm not looking at like a Julius Peppers one-year deal in here. Mario Williams was at $16 million. That was 6.7% over the high water mark before that, not including like some of the silly stuff that was done by the Raiders. J.J. Watt, 16.7. That was a 4.2 growth. Sue hit it big in free agency, jumps to 19. That was a 14.4% growth. Von Miller was 0.1%. That was nothing. Khalil Mack was the big monster at 23.1. Now, Aaron Donald also signed basically the same day. I mean, they were like a day apart. Aaron Donald was 22.5, so you could use that one too. It's a little bit lower percentage, but I just figured that they were kind of working independently, and so I thought this was more realistic. You didn't get another market setter until 2020, so it took a couple of years. That was a 6.4. And then that was exceeded later that summer by 8%. And then you had TJ Watt, who only got a 4% raise. I think in hindsight, they focused too much on guarantees rather than probably upping his actual value. And then you got this big jump out of nowhere to 31.7, which is a 13% increase. So, you could get in there and say that, your average jump is about 9%. And the problem is, it's like, well, what are you basing these numbers off of? And you get into different deals. So if you took the 8% increase and you use Watt as the high end player, because basically what you're saying is, well, this is a legitimate contract for TJ Watt. It's a 4-year deal, I think, whether 5-year deal or whatever. We had an existing year that was on there. It wasn't like the Aaron Donald situation that's kind of bogus, and you're talking about an APY over 3 years. And so what if we took 8% on him? You'd get $53 million paid year one, $75 million by year two. That works out to an average APY of 37.7. Year three, you'd have about $98 million paid out. That's 32.7, which is actually higher, than Aaron Donald, right? Where's Aaron Donald? Aaron Donald's at 31.67. So if you're just comparing years, you're over that number. But now, following the TJ Watt structure, you're going to drop down to 30.2 million APY over 4, and we're just going to give it an artificial bump to hit 32 million overall in year 5. But we don't work sometimes on this number. Everyone is focused on this number, and to go from 32 down to 30 and then go back up for a real high end player, that might not be acceptable. Now if you took a $32 million base, and Watt's deal is probably 4 years, right? TJ Watt is 4. Yeah, TJ Watt's 4. I think I was just applying that as a 5. You're throwing in that 5th year to get there. So let's say you use 32 million, which is, basically the base value that you want to get to exceed Donald, but you use the TJ Watt cash flow structure versus the Aaron Donald cash flow structure. You can see how this obliterates Donald's 3 year. San Francisco would be looking at a 103 payment, which works out to about 34.6 per year, which is way above Aaron Donald's 31.67. And then you're going to do a 4th year to bring it down to 32. So, that would be a problem for San Francisco. And then what I call it the disaster scenario was, what if they wanted to apply a 13% raise on Donald's APY, which means you want to get up to about $36 million a year if you're Nick Bosa. And again, using Watt's contract as the guideline, and where you get into those years, right? We're talking about a 4-year deal, not a 5-year deal. You're talking about paying $63 million in new money over the first year. 44.7 would be your average over 2, 38.8 over 3, when the high end market's at like, whatever TJ Watt is probably now. What is TJ Watt's at 90.8? Aaron Donald is at 95. So 95 would be your high end. So you'd be at 95, and you'd be talking about 116 compared to 95. And then you'd be at 143.4 to get to that average of 35.9, on the back end. So, depending on what you're going with, there's so many different ways that I could see these numbers playing out because of that Donald deal. I think it makes for a situation where the two sides might be pretty far apart, just because you can't even agree on, well, what is our baseline? Is our baseline TJ Watt? Is our baseline Aaron Donald? Should it be Aaron Donald's 3? Like, as long as we match Aaron Donald's 3, that should be fine. And that's right in line with TJ Watt's. And then you get into, well, what kind of increase are we talking? Is Nick Bosa the same as like a Khalil Mack? Is Nick Bosa the same as Aaron Donald? Or is Nick Bosa more like his brother? What is that number? So it seems like, maybe these are things that obviously they should have had maybe hammered out before. But there's just so many ways that this can go. I just kind of see this one as being complicated. Now, this is the contract that should set the edge market. This will solidify it. So this will take the Donald stuff kind of out of the equation. But this will take that out. But it will, I think put some. Sorry, Nellie's jumping around here. I think that it'll put some clarity as to where pass rushers are going to go in the future. But it's a messy situation probably for San Francisco right now. I do imagine that they'll get that taken care of, but who knows how long that'll take. All right, let's do some questions here. I think that's it on the contracts, right? I don't think there's any. I don't think there's any Chris Jones news that was too interesting. I don't think, at least. I'm still under the impression that he should be asking for at least $30 million a year. That's one of those that may work itself out, may not. So let me just look. I don't want to do the emails on here, so let me see if I can just pull up my emails on the phone, then I can just keep the screen open and work it that way. This is all stuff I probably should have done before. All right, let's see. David. Listening to last week's pod had me wondering about contracts for running backs. Clearly there's a drop-off from their first 4 years on that second contract. Question is, if you didn't extend the running back, you would likely be drafting a rookie running back to replace him. So the question, can we take some type of average value for a running back who had over 1,000 yards in years 1 through 4 and what they project to have in years 5 through 6? Could be EPA, whatever metric you want to do, compared to what the expected EPA or whatever for a random rookie running back drafted to replace that older running back. Basically, can we expect the older running back on the aggregate to outperform the generic running back? Yeah, absolutely you can do that. That's a very simple one. So, that article that I wrote on the running backs looks at the expected production of those players. I'm not sure if I'm even going to be able to dig it up right now. Let's see. So I'm sure I have it back here. Let me see if I can do a quick search for it. I don't even remember what I called it. This might be the one. Yeah. So, we can look here at our expected production level, for our running backs. And it depends, again, on what you want to, look at. So this is running and receiving yards. And I did one that was, I didn't put it in the article. I had it last week in a file somewhere. Players that were above or had 2 1,000-yard seasons over the course of their rookie careers. But, let's look at 1,000-yard season. I mean, basically our expectation year 5, year 6 for the players is going to be around 600 yards, give or take a little bit. So that is our expectation for the players. Now, this is obviously only looking at a subset of very good players. So these numbers are going to be inflated over this. So you would have to look and, go to something like Pro Football Focus, go to something like Pro Football Reference, look up the numbers for players that were drafted. I would do them by, whether they were undrafted, first round, second round, third round, that kind of stuff, and just put together a population. I'd look from 2011 through 2020 or something like that, 21, 22. Look at all the players and just determine, what those numbers work out to be. And, here is the rushing and receiving yards. You can see that drops down to, also pretty similar, where that is. It's a different group of players that we're looking at there. But, that's basically where those numbers trend. So you can look that up. My assumption is going to be that if you look at a player who gets playing time, meaning they're drafted highly where they have to get playing time, I can't imagine that they would have a problem putting up these numbers. Now, you can argue about whether you should draft a player that high, but I think what you'll find is that'll be the case. But the average population is probably going to be below this if you just take a look and you lump in like 7th round runners with 2nd round runners and everything else. I think you would just want to break it down by round, just so you kind of have an idea as to, okay, where should you draft a player to overtake that veteran running back, and what would the difference in salary be? If we come out with saying, okay, the average expectation for a 2nd round runner is this, well, what's the gap between the two salaries? And figure out if that's worthwhile to do. So you can definitely do it. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but you could definitely, do something like that. This is from Max. Wondering how much you believe Patrick Mahomes would have made against the cap for him to be overpaid, not worth having it on a team's roster. Seems like his cap hit could double and he'd still have surplus value. What do you think? That's a good question. He's so much better than everybody else, realistically. In my mind, there's only 2 players. It's a 2-player position with him and Allen, and Mahomes is more consistent than Allen. Allen probably does give you that ability for just, some ridiculous kind of super hot, downfield throws kind of stuff. I've always said that I think, and obviously this isn't how it happened in that one game between the two of them, where they just kind of went shot for shot for shot. I kind of feel like if you needed a player to play for 60 minutes, Patrick Mahomes is your clear number one quarterback you're taking. If you were taking a game situation where you needed to come from behind with like 4 minutes left, 3 minutes left, I'd probably throw Allen out there and say that, he probably has the higher potential to, just manufacture these ridiculous, gigantic plays, that give you the opportunity to pull out a game that you have no business winning. Relative to market right now, there's two issues that impact, I think, the worth of the quarterback relative to the market. One is just how much better can teams get by having a lower cost quarterback. When we're talking about a rookie, that's a lot of money that you can spend. When we're talking about a veteran, it might become a little bit less, as to what that gap is. Because even if you took Mahomes and let's say Mahomes was $90 million a year, just to say something like that, $40 million over Justin Herbert, essentially making Herbert effectively a rookie to Patrick Mahomes. He still wouldn't be a rookie to Mahomes because there's a difference, even though the gap is the same. There's a difference in having a $52 million quarterback and being able to go and sign free agents versus having like a $7 million quarterback and going in to sign free agents. So it's like the Chargers wouldn't be able to compete with a team like the Jaguars right now, who have that rookie quarterback under contract. You wouldn't be able to compete for the same pool of players. And the Chiefs, well, they wouldn't really need to because they have Patrick Mahomes. So, my guess is you could actually make a case that, you could outdistance everybody by 30 million, 40 million, and you would still maintain a competitive advantage on these teams that have a veteran quarterback. Just because of that inefficiency that exists with the rookies that come in that play pretty well. So I think you might be able to do that. I don't know if it's sustainable over the long term. But there is certainly a number where the gap does probably become too big. But I guess you'd have to look at, how much more would that number have to be for the Chiefs to have to gut players that are completely irreplaceable. And I think it would have to be pretty big, for that to be the case. Would it make the Chiefs' job harder against a rookie? Yeah. Because the Chiefs would have access to less talent, and I think the teams with the rookies would still have access to the same level of talent. Really, until the NFL got to a completely fair free agency system, meaning everybody goes into free agency if you want, everybody gets into free agency in like year 4, you could still have a quarterback that's probably significantly higher than everybody else, just because of the way the market bears out. Now, maybe if the market ever took shape to where, let's say Mahomes cost 90, Josh Allen cost 80, Herbert was at 70, that you just had this very, very realistic gaps that started to really account for different kinds of production levels. There are ways that you might be able to build teams around that for short term that I think might work out. But under the current system, I think Mahomes could be a lot higher than these other guys, and it wouldn't change the Chiefs' advantage against all these other teams that have a veteran quarterback. I just think it would make it harder for them against the teams that had a rookie quarterback. Let's see. With discussion about Aaron Rodgers requesting equity, I was wondering how non-cash payments in an NFL contract factor into the cap. For example, I thought a former NFL quarterback had access to a private jet. I'm not sure on the private jet front how that stuff works. if it's a team chartered thing, if there's other players that go on. I'm not exactly sure, but I think basically with anything that a player is given above and beyond just normal consideration for playing football, you're supposed to do a fair market valuation on it. And if you had a valuation on, say, an equity stake in a team and that was worth $20 million, his cap number should increase by $20 million. So that's how you would go about doing that. Obviously, the equity thing, I think, was done to block the potential of Tom Brady probably this year doing anything with the Raiders. I think the other thing is that they just want to make sure that they don't get into a situation with any of the guys who do have a big amount of leverage to maybe go in there and work out something to where they can get a very small percentage of like the team as part of a contract. But in theory, everything would be valued at a fair market value. If you were talking about equity in a team, I would assume that they would use whatever the valuation was of the most recent team that was sold and what that would be. And, that's how you might come up with something like that. So I think that's kind of what they would do. I think that's it for, let me just do one check. Those all came in the last day or two, I think. Let me see if I had anything that was a little bit older in here. Oh, I did from Bo. Is it correct that the Bears still are about $50 million below the cash spending threshold? What happens if a team doesn't spend enough? So if they don't spend enough, they're forced to, unless something changed in the CBA, they're supposed to divide that money back up among all the players who are on the team in those years. So let's say you had a shortage of $20 million, you would give $20 million basically to the union, I guess is how it would work, and then they would divide that up among the players who were on the team. I'm not sure what equation they use to do that. I don't know if it's based on what they earn. I don't know if it's based on playing time. I don't know what that would be. As to where the Bears are, I don't think they'll have a problem, but I don't know where they are. I don't have that one in front of me. That calculation's a little different because of the way that they value signing bonuses. And the Bears have all the way until early March to convert money to bonus money to hit that number. Let's see. I think I did that one last week. I think I did those last week. Let me see. Sorry if I missed anything here. Just running through these. Oh, and somebody did ask about some of these, live streaming or something like that. I guess I could try to do some Twitter Q&As that way as just a separate thing versus doing it like this. But I'm not sure. So, all right, let's go over to Twitter and let's see, profile. There's my lovely face. This is from yesterday. This was funny. I got carded yesterday. I'm old. I don't know what I'm doing getting carded. They must have a policy of just carding everybody. I laughed about it. I thought it was hilarious. She said, I got to see ID for ID. I have my kids with me. I thought it was 14. She's going to be 14. So anyway, I thought that was funny. Let's see. All right, so we got some questions here. All right, so I'll pull these up. I think most people are okay with having their Twitter stuff up. So I think this should be all right. All right, Curtis. I'm not going to pull up the whole tweets. I'll just go through them in the thread format. Why do you think the Seahawks restructured Quandre Diggs' contract for cap room instead of asking Jamal Adams to take a pay cut, coming off a serious injury and $18 million cap number? Seem an obvious move. I don't think there's any traction that they would get with Jamal Adams. And, the Jamal Adams situation, would just be bad. It was a bad trade. It was a bad trade when they made it. It only really had a 1-year window of return that they could have expected on it, and then everything really went downhill for them with the Russell Wilson stuff. Obviously, they had a better than expected year last season. Nothing to do with Jamal Adams. But I just think that's like a lost cause, is probably going down that route. So I think that rather than going down that route, I think they just probably assumed that this was the easier thing to do. Let me see what his contract even looks like at this point. 11 million, on the year. And, here's the other thing. Even if you did a pay cut, even if he agreed to something, I don't know how much he would take off. You'd probably have playing time thresholds that you could earn it back on, which means you might earn it back anyway. But, if he was looking for anything in a restructure where you might have to do a bonus, he's already at 14.2 dead next year. I think you just look at this as a total sunk cost at this point. And, I don't think that there's any reason to add that on, because they were using it. They were using that money to work on their player extension. That was one I didn't talk about. But, yeah, that was really what they were using that for. Lord Rustin, how do you think Becton takes it if he gets cut on Hard Knocks? He might do something crazy. I have no idea how he would take it. He's not getting cut. The Jets don't really do that. The Jets will try to get some kind of value for him. I think at this point you just chalk it up that, his body is not going to hold up at the NFL level. It was a concern when he came in the league. No one expected it to be this quick. He's just a very raw player. It's still some time, but you never know. Thoughts, guys can, guys that you could do. All right, Fizzle. Let's see. Thoughts on J.C. Tretter. What should he do versus what will he do? What would you do if you were him? Why has each and every one of his predecessors failed miserably? I don't know. It's a tough job. I think that currently, and this could be off on this, the current executive committee that they have has the feeling of like they've done some things to try to bypass the body as a whole. And I can understand why you do that, right? Like, I can understand reasons why you might do something like that. You feel like you've put in a lot of this time and you don't want something to get completely derailed by, online opinions and posturing and stuff like that. So I kind of get that. I think from a communication standpoint, I think he does very good. He posts stuff on Twitter. He posts things on the player's website. So I think he does that. I just think that, I don't know. I just feel like they miss out. It's like they look at little battles instead of trying to look at the big picture. When it comes to it, and the NFL stuff, to be honest, none of it changes until you shorten the length of those rookie deals, and that's just not something that seems to be on the mind of any of them. It doesn't seem to be anything that is that's a thought for them to do. It doesn't seem to be anything that they really want to tackle when they've gotten into setting up negotiations. And I just think that's kind of been where they've missed out. Now, you're going to have a new union head that comes in, so you're going to have to see where that leads. But I think that's just kind of the, in my opinion at least, that's kind of the issue I think at hand. Hypothetical, if the Rams are sellers at the trade deadline and trade Aaron Donald, what would that do from the cap standpoint? That's old King 40. So let's take a look at Aaron Donald's deal. So to make it easy, let's just say they trade him now. 2023. So you'd have 12.5 dead plus. Oh, he already earned this roster bonus, right? Or was that roster bonus prorated? Jeez, I got to go back and look at that. That roster bonus was prorated. 13.5, 12.5. I probably should have pulled that out from there. That certainly looks like it was prorated. So you'd have 12.5 dead this year. Next year you'd have 28.5 million dead on your salary cap if you did that. So you'd have some wiggle room here. I think that this is a possibility that he could be traded if he was open to it. I think if he said, no, I don't want to be traded, I don't think they would trade him. But I do think that this is something that they could consider doing, as the season wears on. JRB, Darrell Taylor was a second-round pick for the Seahawks. He missed his entire rookie year due to injury, which will make him a restricted free agent when his rookie contract is up. Can you talk specifics on his contract and your thoughts on this rule? Was he on IR or was he on NFI? I'm probably not going to have this listed here. So if he was just on injured reserve, for the year, then, he's fine. Okay, so no, he was NFI, so I have him down as restricted. Okay. For when he hits. So he must have been on NFI, I guess, that first year. He would fall under the same concept as a restricted free agent. So you could tender him at, whatever level. And, that's how it works. I think the rule is okay, simply because, it's like if you're injured in the course of playing football, obviously you should keep your status as a free agent. If you are injured because of some other reason, I can understand why you should lose kind of a year in there, towards free agency because you were hurt by something that you did, versus the team causing it. So I think it's a fair rule because of that. How should the team handle the Zach Martin situation? I don't know. That's another tough one, I think, for Dallas here. He's got 2 years, I believe, remaining on his contract. It was a very good deal for Dallas. I think Martin's side of this, I think they just kind of misread some of the tea leaves that could happen. It's a position that is usually wide open in free agency. So any position which is wide open in free agency, even if you're a great player, it's hard to block the market for that long because eventually there will be a free agent who gets over. And once that free agent gets over, in this case it was probably Tooney, who was maybe the guy. Once that gets over, that opens up the market for all the other guys on extensions who are the quote-unquote current Zach Martins, to get up to $20 million a year, and you're kind of left holding the bag on the outside looking in at your deal, which is like $14 million a year. I'm sure Dallas looks at this as that they gave him a very good contract at the time. It was a very high guarantee level at the time, and that he agreed to take that longer deal and that he should probably honor at least this year of it. My guess is that maybe they move some money up this year from next year into this year to just try to get him into camp and get the deal taken care of. I don't think that they'll do a new deal just because he has the 2 years left, but I guess we'll wait and see if that happens. Daniel, what would you do with Chris Jones? That's a good question. Really good player. I think. I think probably the Chiefs' best thing to do here, I think, would be to extend him, but to try to do it in a way to where you're not really paying that much extra this year for him, and make sure there's not a no trade or something like that, and keep that possibility open of trading him to where you only prepaid a little portion of that contract, and then look to maybe you look to trade him next year. I wouldn't look to trade him now. I think you go into this season and you try to put your best foot forward with your team and do what you can. But I think you want to leave that possibility open of trading him after the season. And if something really went wrong this year and Mahomes got hurt or something like that, that would give you the option to trade him in season. But I'd look, I think, to kind of pacify the situation and do something there. Just as long as it doesn't impact me so much in the future. I just want to still have that ability, to move out and maybe get something in a trade. Nick, how's the Raiders cap situation looking like now that they restructured 2 of the contracts of Jones and Myers? Do I have all those? Do I have Chandler Jones's in there? I probably should look. That was a while ago they did Chandler Jones, right? I have. They only have like $5 million in cap room. Let me see. Maybe they did something with Jones and I just missed it. Nope, I have it there. Their cap situation is not good. They have about $5 million. They're probably going to have to go in there at some point and change Garoppolo's number, down and throw a signing bonus in there again. Talk about much ado about nothing, right? He passed his physical. Woohoo! All the conspiracy theories. They signed him to sell jerseys and then turned to Tom Brady. I guess there was no I guess maybe we were a little wrong there, kind of thing. They came out and just so you know, he can still lose those guarantees if he re-injures that foot. People were saying, okay, he's locked in. His salary is still not locked in next year. It's not locked in until after the season. But his salary for this year is basically locked in unless he hurts his foot in preseason. Because once regular season starts, even though an injury waiver can apply, it wouldn't supersede the termination pay, which kicks in if you're on the roster week 1. So I would imagine the Raiders are probably going to look to restructure the deal to create cap room to function, but I don't think they'll do it until training camp breaks, because you at least know he's healthy going into the season. Because once he's in the season, it's basically a sunk cost for this year. So I think that'll be the timing for them. But right now, they don't have much in the way of cap room. Huddy, Hunter's situation, how the Vikings would go about an extension for someone of his caliber. Well, obviously that worked itself out. They did the 117. I think that's the right call for them. It's a deal that the minute it was signed was always going to be a problem if he continued to play well, and it's been a problem for them. But this gives them the most potential to actually go out and trade him this year, which is really, unless the Vikings are having a great season, I mean, that's what the Vikings should be doing. Davey, can I have some money? Not from me, but you can get some money. High Times Vikes. What type of compensation could the Vikings reasonably expect in a Hunter trade? What type of contract can Hunter expect to receive from any team at this point? So obviously nothing is going to happen now. So, Von Miller, that was picking up almost his entire contract. They got, I think, a 2 and 3. If you don't pick up the whole contract, maybe a 3. Hunter's not considered that type of player, not to that level, but he's pretty effective. So I think you'd be looking at probably a 3rd round pick is what you could get. Dreadful. What does a potential Jared Goff extension look like after this year, assuming he plays to his normal baseline? Seems like the Lions have kind of locked themselves into him. They don't have alternatives. Yeah, it's almost like they're going to be in a situation where unless the bottom falls out, they're not going to have that ability to go in there and draft a quarterback. So I think, it's tough because you do see changes in the market, right? You got Daniel Jones at 40, which is very different than, players who signed at 40 before. I think in Goff's case, even though you're talking about a player who has not been released, I would say your upside that you're looking at here, if for him, would be 37.5. Let's call it 38, just to jump above Derek Carr. Maybe a similar deal in structure, 60 guaranteed, something like that. Might be the thing. On the low end, it's not going to be Geno Smith, on the low end, because he's already earning more with the Lions, right now. Let me see what his numbers are with the Lions. Let me see his cash. They could go there. He's playing every year for like $26 million. They could offer him a deal similar to Geno Smith as well. So I guess your floor number would be something like 30 million, 32, 33. 33 is what he was at on his last one. But with a lot of upside based on performance, probably matching performance. The only difference is if Jared Goff does it 2 years in a row, that's a little harder than Geno Smith. And Geno Smith's a situation where Geno Smith was a career like $1 million backup. And, he has the one big year and you're bumping his salary to 25. And you're saying, okay, if you go out and you do it for another year, we'll pay you 40. We'll pay you like a high-end quarterback. So Goff kind of falls somewhere in between those two extremes. But I would say somewhere in that range of 30 to 38 would be what you'd be looking at. The 30 would probably be with a lot of upside based on performance. The 38 would probably just be a ceiling like that. That would probably be, it would be a floor and a ceiling number at the same time. I think you want to be careful with what you guarantee them. I think you just want to have some flexibility within that deal, to be able to move on at some point. But I would think that's probably what they're looking at. I've always wondered how the league regulates non-footballing agreements with players. Back when Brady was a Pat, he often took below-market deals, but the team also paid for players to train at the TB12. What stops him from making up the rest of his deal in outside payments? So I'm not exactly sure how some of that works, but I think as long as it's an organization, so the first thing is you're not paying Tom Brady direct, right? It's a company. So I think as long as it kind of falls into that realm, and the price that you're paying is in line with what you would be paying any place, to go train at or whatever, I don't think the NFL flags that as anything outside of the norm of doing business. I could be wrong, but I think that's how they do that. Jacob, are there more people signing deals during this year's training camp period than usual? It feels like a lot of big name extensions. So it has been a lot of big names. It is not the most. It's close to the most in July, and it's still got a ways to go. We might get there by August to be the most ever, but I do think there's something to the fact that it's the most big ones. It's not like we're getting in these deals that are, the $12 million player, the $10 million player, signs this extension. It's a lot of guys at 20 plus, that are big name guys, kind of resetting the market at the different positions. So I think that in that respect, this has been I think a big year for that. Schmitty Sports Stakes. I feel like the most understood contributor to current market conditions for running backs and minimal drop-off for substitutes or replacement value. Is there any data that backs this up? Yeah. I mean, you can look at the numbers, and, it's that where do a lot of these running backs come from? They're not necessarily coming from the top of the draft when you're looking at productive 1,000-yard runners. It's always been that way, right? We always look and it's like, oh, this is such a great player, even though he was drafted in the 4th round or the 5th round. It's much more prevalent at a position like that than it is at some of the other positions. And you can also look at, what the data tells you for those veteran running backs who are missing time, less effective, less efficient, and their numbers drive down, and you replace them with these younger guys where, maybe you're going to need 3 runners, maybe 2, maybe a guy drafted in the 7th round, a guy drafted in the 4th, and undrafted, and find the right guy from that group. But odds are one of those guys is going to give you at a very cheap cost the production level. So if you're talking about a running back that's going to make $13 million a year, and the expectation is probably going to be that he only rushes for like 600, 700 yards a year, because of injury and everything else, and your alternative to that, and it might be that it's three picks, but your alternative to that is an investment of $2.1 million among 3 players, and then once you find one guy, you're set for the next 3 years. You can find one out of that group that'll give you that production plus more. So it's like 2.1 million, and okay, maybe an extra 2 spots or an extra draft picks that you had to waste. But you're talking about an $11 million, $12 million savings per year at least, on that position. Navi, who and how much dead cap is plaguing the Raiders? Did I close the Raiders? So the Raiders have about $30 million in dead money. That's top third of league, middle portion of league. Maybe top third. They're right at that. Those couple of teams, 1, 2, 3, 4. 10th. They're 10th, and there is a big drop off till you get to the Colts. That's almost a $5 million drop. The big players there: Corey Littleton 9.9, Derek Carr 5.6, Carl Nassib 4.9, Kenyon Drake, that was a bad contract, 4.4. Leatherwood 3.9, Waller's only at 5.40, and so on and so forth. So it's just those couple of players. It's just enough guys with not huge numbers, but just enough guys with mid-tier dead money numbers that drives that total up. Justin, thoughts on the overall state of the Giants after the extension they gave out and Saquon tags still have good cap health in the future years? So my concern with the Giants is just Daniel Jones. Like I think that's a lot to give for him. I don't think he's a good quarterback. I think even though $40 million now is not the same as $40 million 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Like it's very, his $40 million is very different than Dak Prescott's $40 million. I think that contract is very questionable. The Andrew Thomas one, like I mentioned before, I thought that contract is pretty much great. So, you can look at them, in that way, but it's all going to be dependent on Daniel Jones. If Daniel Jones is not the player that they thought, they're going to be in big trouble. Brian, this isn't to sound too negative of your previous opinion, but I know you were feeling the Jets trade for Rodgers was an overpay at the time. This couldn't have been seen as a possibility, but does your opinion change? Sure. Absolutely changes. I think I mentioned that in that podcast. Now, I'd have to pull out my trade calculator on that, and rerun those numbers. So, when we looked at the surplus value that the Jets gave up by giving up all those picks, off the top of my head, I don't remember what that number was. But part of that was the fact that, the negative on it was you were paying $55 million a year for a player that was going to give you, $50 million in value. Now, in theory, you're getting $50 million in value or $52 million in value, whatever you want to call the high end of the market, at 37.5. So you've offset a lot of that surplus value that you're losing in the draft picks, because now you can go out and you can use that money that you saved to help sign free agents. Now, we're still not at the point yet where we know Aaron Rodgers is going to play in 2024 or that he's going to play at a high level. That obviously has to factor into it. The biggest negative on the Jets is it was big money, and it was big money that could just be for a year. The year part still stands in, no matter how many good feelings there are right now and Aaron Rodgers, doing this deal. There's nothing that says Aaron Rodgers is going to play in 2024. If he's only playing for 1 year, it's not a great situation for the Jets unless you win the Super Bowl, along with that. But yeah, absolutely. You would run those numbers again, and you would change that, because, one of the examples that I was using was Russell Wilson in there, because Russell Wilson you knew was going to play for X amount of years, and you had his effective value at whatever. Now, obviously, he played terrible, but you didn't know that going into it. Going into it, you thought he was one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and the effective value on his contract was, in the low 40s, probably high 30s. So, again, you're offsetting some of that value that you lose out of that draft pick, by the salary cap savings that you're now getting at the quarterback position. So will that balance out where you're looking at the 4 years that you lose on the draft picks versus the 2 years of what you gain here? I don't know that yet. I'd have to work those numbers out, but this would put it much more in line, I think, with being a fair trade versus what it was before. It probably still skews in the favor of the Packers, but I don't think it would be so egregious as where it was before. But I'd have to actually rerun the numbers to see how much that came off. But I feel like the numbers that I put in there at the time was Rodgers, if he was $35 million a year, like that might work out. And so he's pretty close to that. So I would guess that probably works there. But he's got to play 2 years. I think that's the thing, is you need 2 years at a high level. And, that's what you need. Richard, I saw a comment in relation to the Colcometa extension that it helped Bears towards the floor they need. After extending him, how much further do they have to go? I'll do an article on that at maybe the end of training camp, because it's a little harder to do right now because the rosters are so big. So it's like, yeah, I can drop down to the top 60 players, but numbers might change. So excuse me, I can look that up and see where they might be. In regards to it, but I think they should be all right, with what they're doing. Rico, what are your thoughts on Rodgers restructuring the Jets' overall cap situation going into the season? So, I talked about that before. Terrific contract for the Jets, whether that was because of him, whether that was because of the Jets, whether it was collaboration, who knows, who cares? Works out very well for them. Overall cap situation is, it's okay, but, I would do that kind of stuff that I mentioned. Just blow it out for the next 2 years, and if you have to be Tampa Bay 2-3 years from now, so be it. That's the position you went in, so you may as well go for it all. You don't want to go half. You don't want to be like, okay, well, we got the quarterback and we've got these two great young rookies and, we'll see where things go next year and we'll make it work. Just go for it. Just do your planning now. The thing that sets a team like the Eagles apart is they plan for these things. They do some stuff that's wacky, but they plan for it. Don't be in a situation where next March you're like, oh, well, I wish we could have had more cap room. You got the ability to create it now. Do it. Zach, do you think the league will ever get rid of the escrow rule for guaranteed money? And if they do, will the Packers and Bengals drop the rule? No, they won't get rid of that. And I don't think those teams would drop that rule either. Jason, can a player with a signed, filed contract that has guaranteed money be altered to give less guaranteed money? Sure. I can't see why not. Obviously, it did here. Now we get into that technical aspect where maybe we want to look at this and say that they gave him more guarantees, so there was no way the union could step in because there was a fully guaranteed salary. I don't know if the union has any right to do that. The guarantees are basically left open to pretty much anything and everyone. So I don't know if this could be a situation like the union in baseball that stepped in years and years and years ago when Alex Rodriguez wanted to go to, I think it was Boston, and nobody would touch that contract that he had with Texas, and the union jumped in and said, nope, not going to fly. Eventually he ends up on the Yankees, but, they wouldn't let him take the pay decrease. So, that might be one, like years ago, this is an old Jet player, but Lavernius Coles gave up a guaranteed salary to become a free agent. But the Jets made him void his contract. So I don't know if that was, at least I think they did. I think they made him void out his own deal. So that might have been something that they were doing just from a technical standpoint to make sure that there was no issue. But I don't think there's any issues with doing that. David, emailed you over one. Thoughts about the running back second contracts versus the average performance of the random drafted one. So, yep, I think we talked about that. Derek, how often do players hit their escalators in their contracts? Seems incentive-laden deals are becoming more often, but I'm curious if it's kind of a bait and switch. Most players don't get it. Yeah, usually it's a bait and switch. The amount of players, if you run through the site where you look in that other bonus column and you look at incentives that get paid out, it's a pretty low percentage of the incentives. Most are pretty high-end kind of stuff, hard to reach. So not a lot of guys necessarily get them and pick them up. Ziggy, if the Cardinals get an early pick next year and decide to move on from Murray, what kind of interest do you think there'd be in his contract, assuming they try to get it under before March 22nd? Is it a net negative? Would anybody be interested? There's always teams interested in a quarterback. The only thing that would worry me with him is I think there's a lot of negatives. And the negatives, some of them were the Cardinals' own doing by that contract that they wrote. When you do a contract like that basically says we have no faith in the player to take the time to study the playbook, to study the opponents, to study the game plan, and we need to actually put it in his contract. Like that's a epic failure when you're trying to sell him as an option for other teams around the league. So, even though he was a number one overall pick, do you have that question? Did you have that question when he was coming into the league? Does this just reinforce it, or do you look past that because of the talent in the player? You look at someone like a Baker Mayfield. Now, Mayfield did not have anywhere near as successful of a run as Kyler Murray did in the league. But, Baker Mayfield basically just blew up out of nowhere and became almost worthless. That was a player that gave up some guaranteed money, I believe. So that would be an example of a player that also did that. I'm just looking at his deal here. If you traded him next year, it's 46-2 dead. It's a big number. Obviously, they would do it. I don't think that's a issue. His numbers for a team acquiring him, they'd be the cash numbers we see here. So the numbers for a team acquiring would be about 39, 32, 42, 36, 46. This is the only guaranteed year. The others, there's some stuff that kicks in. I think given these numbers here, you could justify it. 38, 32, 42, 36, that's going to be relatively cheap to market. So I think there'd be value there. I don't think you're getting multiple first round picks for him or anything like that. But you would get something decent, probably a first round pick, or at the very least, you're going to get a second that can escalate to a one. But he's got to be somewhat effective. It just has to be a situation where the team isn't effective. But, he's able to move the ball. They're able to score some points. He gives you some hope. It's just that the team itself isn't any good. And, you've just decided it's better to just start over and move on, give everybody a new start. And that's the way you can maybe maximize what you get back for him. Shoes. If Mahomes was a free agent without a tag, what would he get in free agency? Also, what would a new contract for Buckner look like? He's getting older, but DTs have been aging better. I don't know about Buckner. I thought that he was outside potential of someone that could get traded or possibly cut. Like, I didn't think that he really fit in with where the Colts are right now. But, the Colts are kind of in this weird position, I think, where they think they're going to compete and they're not sure. Very similar to Leonard Williams. Like, Leonard Williams shouldn't be on this contract right now. But there he is. So, that's kind of where that is right now. I don't think that he kind of fills out that range to where he's going to be getting that salary increase that these younger guys did. I don't think he'd be looking at the bump that Hargrave got. I think if he goes out there and he has a really good season, I think he'd probably look at it and say, look, Hargrave's at 21. We'll extend you at the same 21 that you're at right now. Steady pay over 3 years. I kind of think that's more the kind of player that would be if they were to extend him out. Other part of the question, Mahomes was a free agent. So if Mahomes was a pure free agent, how much could he get? Gosh, that's a really good question. If the market was at 50, I guess it would be something like 75. If you looked at, cap room, obviously cap room is not the greatest of indicators here, but, you'd have these couple of teams that have a lot of cap space, and there's probably a couple of teams that have very low cash budgets. You'd probably be looking at trying to find a team that has a lot of cap room and has a low cash budget. Sometimes those two things don't actually go hand in hand, even though it would seem like that should. If you get to 2024 and, you look at cash spending, teams like the Patriots, for example, they only have 116 million committed to their roster, and they had a ton of cap room. That's the kind of team that would just blow the market away. To bring in a player like that. The Bears might be a team in that same kind of situation. So, you never want to say, well, they're just going to get $1 bazillion. I think you come up with numbers that are way over market, but they make some sense probably within a market for a position. 70, something like that. It would be a very big increase, but I don't think it would be something that doubles, the next closest player. But I think that's what would happen. But we've never seen it. The closest you got was Peyton Manning, and Manning basically went into free agency and said, I just want to make what Brady makes. And I think they were like, but you could get more because, even with your injury, like, teams are going to be after you. They never had this opportunity. It's like, I just want what Brady makes. And I think the story was when he found out he was making a little bit more than Brady, he was like, why am I making more than Brady? And they were like, well, that's what they offered. Like, we couldn't go into a negotiation with them offering you 20 and say, well, no, he only wants 17 or 18. So, I think we just really haven't seen it. Kirk Cousins, is nowhere near that quality of player. Did become the highest paid, but not by too much, at the time. But, it would really be interesting. I would love if that's how the league turned out. All right, so I think that does it for me. So I think that covers it for this week. Hopefully I'll be back next week. I think we're going to be out, I think, on Saturday. So hopefully I'll try to sneak a podcast in, at some point next week. And it might be a Sunday night again. It'll either be Friday night or Sunday night. I think Jacob starts football practice after that. So I don't think I'm going to have a chance during the week to be able to jump in on that, because I think he'll have practices. He's already started some practices already. And he had some other activities going on. So I think that'll probably make it a little hard to do during that time, but we'll see. Hopefully, I'll be able to come up with something, though. I can't imagine there's going to be another flurry of deals like this. I would think that it'll be a little bit calmer this week and all the rest of the weeks moving forward. So everybody have a great week, and I will talk to you all again soon.